Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unraveled in Conversation, Creativity, Love, and Dementia, presented by the Global Brain Health Institute and UCSF Memory and Aging Center. It is incredibly exciting to see people from all around the globe. You're very, very welcome. My name is Stephanie Piña Escudero, and I'll be your host and moderator for this conversation across creativity, love, and dementia. I am a geriatrician and an Atlantic Fellow for Equity in Brain Health at the Global Brain Health Institute, or GBHI. And let me tell you a little bit about what GBHI is. It is a program that works to protect the world's populations from threats to brain health. We're located across two sister sites at Trinity College Dublin in Ireland and University of California, San Francisco. The heartbeat of our growing community is our Atlantic Fellows for Equity in Brain Health. Through the fellowship, hundreds of leaders from many different professional backgrounds are working to improve brain health across the world. This evening, we will have the pleasure of discussing Unraveled based on the fascinating real-life connection between the modern-day scientist Dr. Anne Adams and the world-famous composer Maurice Ravel. Unraveled is an essential new play about love, art, science, and who we are at the most profound level. We have some world-class minds gathered here tonight, so we're in for a real treat. But before we meet them, I'd like to share a few notes. This event has been recorded and will be available to view on demand afterwards. Tonight's discussion will focus on ideas related to the play Unraveled, so if you haven't yet seen it, or when you're ready to watch it again, I encourage you to watch this 90-minute play at www.unravelledplay.com. And as an overview of tonight's event, we will first meet the writer of Unraveled, Jake Broder, the actress who portrayed Dr. Anne Adams, Lucy Davenport, and the neurologist who treats Anne, Dr. Bruce Miller. Then we will follow a conversation with an Emmy-winning film editor, Rita Stern Milch, who is David Milch's wife, who unfortunately was not able to join us today. But we are really, really grateful to have Rita joining us. And finally, an audience Q&A session with the panelists. And you're invited to ask any questions on the chat box that is below during the program. All right. So let's get started. It is my absolute pleasure to invite you to join me in welcoming our first guests. You can find their full biographies in the playbill, which is linked to the description area in the Stellar Events page. All right, so we have Lucy Davenport, who's an actress based in Los Angeles, who stars as Dr. Anne Adams, and she's the lead character in Unraveled, and she's proud and excited to bring this new play to life, especially during the pandemic. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you.
And we have Jake Broder, who's an actor, playwright, and producer based in Los Angeles. And Unraveled is a product of his work as a Hellman visiting artist for neuroscience at UCSF Memory and Aging Center. Welcome, Jake. And we have Dr. Bruce Miller, who directs the UCSF Memory and Aging Center and is co-director of the Global Brain Health Institute. And he's a behavioral neurologist who studies the underlying mechanisms of neurocognitive disorders. And he is a world-renowned expert in diagnosis and management of dementia. So,
honored to be here, Stephanie. Thank you.
All right. So just to get into the mood, we're going to watch a clip. So if you want to introduce us to the first clip, Jake, the first clip of the play.
I think this is a moment when Anne is showing her husband a painting for the first time. And yeah, she's been painting in secret and he didn't know what it was. And it's caused a bit of friction. And she shares it with him for the first time.
The painting is finished. It's almost sunrise. Anne is totally focused on cleaning up the studio.
She finishes and puts Bolero on the stereo.
Here.
This is hostagey, you know, no coffee.
Shush, shush, just stand here and listen.
Oh, that song, on for months, don't need to.
Shush, this is the thing you've been wanting to see.
Yeah,
Well, you're going to now, but you have to get in the mood.
shouldn't matter.
You've got to get in the mood. This is the first time. I'll be better about it later. Just...
Oh, okay, I'm right. Just no coffee, so can't make any...
I want you to be in the mood, okay?
Yeah.
Just shush.
Shushing.
She holds his hand. They stand side by side facing the painting.
Okay. We're in the mood.
Okay.
So? Really, really?
You aren't a terrible painter at all.
So this is a great clip, and I have the first question about it for you, Jake. So as we saw, this is like this pivotal moment in the play, some sort of light bulb moment. It starts out very tense with Anne's husband expressing very openly that he's tired, that he needs coffee. You can see that he has been struggling for a while trying to understand what's going on. And on the other hand, we all saw her stressful behaviors, like trying to control everything with little empathy towards her husband. And then Bolero becomes unraveled, and you can see that both of their expressions totally changed, and it is some sort of beauty emerging from the middle of the chaos. What can you tell us about these things that we just saw as the writer of the play? Sorry.
Well, this bit is kind of the first moment where we see that something kind of wonderful is happening coming from her. And he was doubting before, but now this sort of wipes that slate kind of clean. And this, to me, is in a lot of ways one of the reasons why this story was worth telling in the first place, because what attracted me to it originally was the idea that there is a disease that you can get that will allow you to access a deeper kind of creativity for a moment before taking other things away from you. And the fact that that could exist, I had no idea that that could even be. And through learning about all this, I've kind of realized not only is that true in a little way, it's true in a very, very big way. There's a lot of the flip side of dementia is an awakening of creativity. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the picture. It's an intrinsic part of the picture, which also has to do with empathy. And it just changed my perspective on what the disease is, what it means, and what creativity can be in relation to it.
Thank you very much. And my next question would be for Lucy. So we, in this little clip and throughout the film, we saw a brilliant performance of a very, very, very complex character. So Anne has this many layers. You played the old Anne, who's sort of fading away, at least from an external perspective. And then there is like this new Anne who is emerging as an artist. And then you played this Anne in Anne's mind, who's the Anne that she has always been, who's discussing from a character of the past, trying to figure out what's going on with her. How was the experience of playing this character with such contrast of layers?
Well,
I think that one of the exciting things about playing her was that you're led very gradually along with her journey of discovery of, she's discovering herself as the audience discover it. She doesn't really understand what's going on. She has to go on blind faith for most of the play. And I think one of the things that we went in, having talked to Dr. Miller and to Jake and the director, was to never make her a victim. And I think this is very important in the portrayal of dementia, is that she, it's never, there are not a lot of portrayals of people with dementia out there where there's something positive or they still have agency. So it was very important for us, to her to be steering this journey, and for her to be going on the journey of discovering herself, and it not to be this awful journey of just stripping things away and her being out of control and a victim. So that was really interesting, to put her in the center of the play instead of sort of off to the side as somebody who needed to be marginalized, giving her full voice. I think because she was able to express what was happening to her in a different medium, in painting, that we had like a map. It seemed to me anyway, we had like a visual map of how her brain was developing in this different way. And so I had this lovely contrast where I would be able to sort of experience her shutting down physically, losing words, losing muscular control, losing the ability to walk and talk. And then she's able to pop out of that in her mind and talk to Ravel, which was this massive release for her from this, what seemed from the outside, this very kind of imprisoned state. But her mind was still in this beautiful, fantastical place of creating things. So I think that contrast really helped me with that complexity, because we have the inner and the outer, and we get to see both. And when you see Ravel, you get to see all the things that she's thinking, that she's going through, that she can no longer express apart from in the painting. And I think that was also the key to her was that it didn't have to all make sense. I think we have this a tendency to want our characters tied up in a nice little bow. And there was such freedom in this, because I remember there was something that Bruce said that Jake must have told me, that there was something magical about people with this form of dementia, that there was something childlike and beautiful about them. And they had a freedom. So I think celebrating her agency and her freedom and the joy, which seems like a very unusual thing to celebrate in a play about dementia, the joy of her experience was very important.
Yeah, listening to both of you actually make me think about this question that I want to ask to Dr. Miller, because at least as doctors, when we communicate a neurodegenerative disease like this, we try to prepare families to cope with the losses that they will experience. But how can we keep transmitting that, yes, it is going to be a difficult process, but also help them to appreciate all this collateral beauty that Jake and Lucy are portraying in the play, and that they actually might encounter during the progression of the disease of their loved ones?
Yes. Well, I think it's a beautiful question, actually, Stephanie, and I think referencing back Lucy's comment about the beautiful simplicity, the elegance of Anne, who she portrayed in such I would say, a realistic way. I think it's something for neurologists to look at, because I think it tells us something very differently than stories that neurologists might tell. But I think one of the things we've learned from Anne and from this play and others like Anne is that the brain is not a monolith, a simple IQ and memory organ. It is really a complex, set of circuits that turn on and off. And we've learned that with the progressive language disorder that Anne developed, in some people, in only a few, but in a few, we can see this magnificent outburst of creativity. And then that was what I think Jake and Lucy captured so fantastically. And I think if you watch the play, you will never forget this, and you'll never think about the brain in the same way.
I completely agree with you, Dr. Miller. And on that note, how about if you introduce us to the next clip, Jake?
The next clip is, what's the next clip?
All right, let's find out together.
So there is definitely deterioration in the front, but look at the back. The back is actually working more than normal. Do you know what this means?
No.
And this part, this improved part, and that's you.
Right.
Oh yeah, that clip is the bit where they talk about.
Go ahead.
The brain.
Yeah, so we see an explanation of what the disease is, and for example, something that I really enjoyed about this play, Lucy and Jake, was that both of you made really sure that the audience could understand a very complex disease such as primary progressive aphasia very well. As Dr. Miller said, it's like once you see this play, you will never see dementia in the same way. And part of it is that you actually understand what's going on. So what I wanted to ask to both of you is, what do you think about your role, not only in bringing hope, in bringing this centered character of dementia, not putting people with dementia in a position of the victims, but also in bringing education about dementia to people throughout your art?
I would say that it's vital. I think one of the things that the play does, which I think is what we should all always be aiming for, is talk about something very complicated in very accessible language. And I don't think it's condescending. It's not simplified in a way to make it comfortable or explainable, but just, I think Jake had it so clear in his head that he was able to put the science in there without it being impenetrable. And I think the more we understand those very basic functions of the brain and some of the things that you see about the science of Anne's condition, and then you see it in behavior, it kind of sticks. It's not just a lecture on brain health. You see maybe a picture of the brain, and then you see what it looks like in a human being. And I think that's why the science sticks in this play, is because we get to experience it as we would in real life, with the person you love, with the person who has this disease, or being the carer of someone who has that disease.
What do you think, Jake?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, three things. One, the hard bit of this was understanding the disease well enough to be able to really try and explain it kind of simply. And that, frankly, I don't know if I completely have yet, but it took a good couple years of really, really digging in to try and just explain it without, having other people have to work too hard, which is crucial. The other thing is that what was it? What was the thing you said, Lucy, about behavior? That was it.
Yeah, translating it into behavior.
That it's one thing to look at a scan, and you can see the blue bit at the front, which is less activity, and that's what the blue means. And then there's orange at the back, which means there's more than normal. It's like, okay, these are colors. I don't need a degree to understand that wow, there shouldn't be an orange bit. Why is there an orange bit? It's just stark. It's clear. But more importantly, there's behavior. And we all experience that. That is the language of drama, of human interaction, is behavior. And when you have a loved one who acts a particular way, and then all of a sudden they change, and it's like, well, what? The whole point, a lot of what happens in this play is the misattribution of that behavior by the partner, saying, well, my loved one is acting this way because they're having an affair, or because they're angry, or because this or that is happening. And those are all emotional reasons that we all get. And Anne doesn't understand even, I think, for a long time why she's doing what she's doing. But stacking those clearly in ways that people can track was the fun of this, because it's like creating a bobsled track that people can go down and say, okay, I can see something's wrong, but I don't see why. Something's changed in her, and he's thinking it's this, but that's clearly not it. So it's almost like a mystery, and unraveling a mystery a little bit. And the pieces of it, as opposed to being a murder or something like a story about that, is a story about what is actually happening inside her brain. And the magic of this is that there is a parallel that happened almost 100 years ago with somebody, and it's through the same piece of art that they connected. And so you have this externalized, she painted this painting and he created that piece of music. And I'll actually tell you that this whole thing boils down to something really, really simple. Once I learned this story, and I realized that they had the same disease and that these two pieces of art were connected like that, I thought, if an audience could understand what she felt like and what it was like to be near her, and if an audience could understand what his frustrations, Ravel's frustrations were, in human terms, you could really feel that, then you could look at the painting and listen to the symphony together and have this kind of communal experience where the audience, after emotionally and intellectually understanding the whys and the wherefore of it all, could actually empathize with what it felt like to have it, to be in the world of it, to feel those things together. And the creation of empathy, that I think, my hunch, that is what would happen to a group of people who learned Anne's story and learned Ravel's story and then watched the painting and listen to Ravel's symphony together. You would just sort of be able to commune with what they went through, and it would leave you changed.
Absolutely. I agree. And I would like Dr. Miller to explain us a little bit more about the gain of function and the gain that your character talked about in the play and in this clip that we just saw. And maybe also if painting is the only artistic expression to be found in patients with neurodegenerative diseases, or if different artistic expressions have been found in different people.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we often forget is that great artists, and this is as much about art as it is about neurodegenerative disease, don't have brains that work like other people. I mean, we've known this always. People in exalted states of bipolar illness, people with attention deficit disorder, with an intense, jumping from one idea to the next. But now I think we're learning, people with degenerative disease can get into a state that brings out extraordinary art. Some of the things that hold them all together is the obsession, the belief in what they're doing, against all odds, I would say, in the case of Anne. I think the art remains much more mysterious than the science. In the science, we learn that, and we learned this studying Anne, Bill Seeley and I in particular, we learned that early in her illness, even before, in fact, she got sick, she had decreased function in a language area on the left side, but increased function in a visual spatial part of the brain. And that, along with this intense drive to produce art, led to some of the most beautiful paintings, I think, that I've ever seen. And one of the other amazing things about this story that Jake and Lucy and that very handsome actor that plays me in the play tell, is that this is not an isolated story. This is the story of creativity, art. I think love also. Although Jake portrays Lucy's husband as a little dim, and I think it helps to clarify how brilliant the art really is that she's producing. So I would say it tells a story of science, the circuitry, but much more mysterious is how could it ever be that one of the greatest pieces of music ever written, Bolero, was written by someone with progressive aphasia, and then a piece 100 years later by a woman who knew nothing about Ravel is produced that captures this in a visual way. Now that's mystery. That we can never explain.
I agree. All right, thank you all, and we're gonna watch this clip about what exactly Jake and Dr. Miller have been talking about, this amazing Bolero visual expression, before we jump into part 2, and we will meet Lucy and Dr. Miller again for the Q&A session.
She wanted you, her friends, her family, the people who she loved and who loved her, her community, to know that she... Stop talking. You know what? She maintained that this disease was a gift. I'm not sure I understand that yet, but she said that I would know if I did this. So let's do this together before we go. Her eulogy is this, and let that be her legacy. Unraveling Bolero.
All right, let's continue our conversation, and I would like to introduce Rita Stern Milch. She was born in Chicago. She's a film editor, and she's a landscape and collage painter. She's an Emmy Award winner for Frontline's episode The Last Abortion Clinic, and she is a proud mother of 3 children and 3 grandchildren who are all in the artistic world. And she met David Milch in Yale. And I'm going to talk a little bit about David, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. He is an American writer, producer, and creator. And in 1992, he co-created NYPD Blue, which set a record by garnering 26 Emmy Award nominations in its premiere season, and later winning the Emmy Award for Best Drama Series. He also created and wrote and executive produced HBO's Deadwood, which received 11 Emmy Award nominations in its first season. And he created and also executive produced the HBO series John from Cincinnati and Locke, starring Dustin Hoffman. And in 2015, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And he subsequently wrote a 2-hour film of Deadwood for HBO that premiered in 2019, and he's currently working on a memoir. So welcome, Rita. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. I apologize that he couldn't be here today.
But it's really, yes, it is an honor to have you.
Thank you.
And, well, as a film editor, I would like if you can tell us a little bit about what you thought about Jake's work, about this play. How do you feel with the story?
I love the play. I love the painting too at the end. I mean, as a painter, it does capture Bolero. I mean, it's an amazing work of art. And so I love the play. I mean, it's different from my experience because David was always an artist and he was always a writer. So with him, it's sort of continuing to create in the face of the disease rather than discovering that creativity. It's funny with his mother, who had dementia late onset though, but she did discover painting at the end, and it really helped her.
Really?
So I've seen it from that end, but as I say with David, it's a slightly different process of trying to keep the creativity alive and the sense that he's producing work, you know.
So let's discuss in this section about writing in the context of neurodegenerative disease from different perspectives. So maybe, Jake, you can tell us a little bit about your perspective as a writer of a play, as being an external observer in this neurodegenerative disease process. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Well, I'm really interested to know what have you felt that his process has changed because of the diagnosis, and how has it transformed?
The process really hasn't changed because David was already bipolar and had other issues. His writing process was dictation. He never could work a computer. I mean, he went from writing longhand on a yellow legal pad to dictating to someone who could put it in a computer. And so for him, the process of writing has always been one of speaking and of talking out loud and explaining what he's doing as he's going along, because he would generally always have students in the room because he was a professor, and that sort of muscle was important to him. So the process now is very much the same in that he starts talking and I take out my phone and I start recording, and then I transcribe what he says, and then I give him back the written material and he can look at that and work from that. I mean, what's happening now is we just do the same thing every day. You know, he records some. It's generally a story about the racetrack. It's interesting because he's very much gone back to the piece he was working on when I first met him, when I was at Yale. And
really?
And so I just keep trying to encourage him to keep doing that, and recording it and what in his story making and storytelling, it's always sort of permeated by whatever's floating in the air, And I mean, for instance, when the guilty verdict, with George Floyd, we were watching that at one point, and all of a sudden the story was about a jury panel and who's doing what to whom, and it just sort of goes like that. So his imagination is very permeable, but the process becomes the same.
That's amazing. And so the subjects being taken from what's going on around, but the stories coming from actually deep themes that he's been thinking about for 8 years or have been.
Yes, there's a young guy around 37. There's an older guy, they're gamblers. It's all versions of the same sort of stories that he told throughout his career.
Is it like variations on a theme? If one was a composer, it's not the same notes over and over. It's
sometimes it feels like the same notes over and over, but it's always interesting, and he'll start to riff on dialogue and stuff, and I just write it up and say, here's the work we're doing. So maybe something will come of it. I don't know, but the process seems to be good for him.
He feels better when it happens?
Yeah, I think he likes to feel productive. He likes to feel like there's good work being done, and and then he offers me many jobs. You should do that. You should do this. You should do that. You should be in it. You should direct it. You should,
Do you think it acts like his creativity acts like some sort of protected space for both of you?
Yes, I do. I mean, that's sort of his happy place. So when I can get him into that zone, it's good for both of us, So.
And I have a question about his previous work. For example, Deadwood. Deadwood is like highly moral, and it documents like the fall of tyrants. Do you think this theme was influenced by his illness, or do you think it was just like a natural end to what the series had been?
Well, I mean, the idea. Wait, let me shut her. I'm sorry. Why? The idea of a man dealing with his mortality, and with the idea of he's not essential to the community, which was sort of what Swearingen comes to accept, like they will survive without me. And there's a marriage, and there's sort of a birth and all that other stuff that's the promise of life to come, while our central character is dealing with his mortality and accepting his diminishment in the community and, in his own eyes. So I was very informed by what he was going through.
Interesting. And could you share with us some of the beauty that you've been able to find in David's work after the diagnosis?
Well, Deadwood was amazing, and a true sort of heroic act to write it and to get it done, and and that again, dealing with his own mortality and the falling away of the power he once held, all came to play in that film. So
and how about more recent things? I mean, of this.
Well, the stuff we're working on now, I mean, it's interesting because it's so archetypically David. It's so Milch. And there are perps, and there's this, and there's that, or there's, people saying very nasty things to each other, and it's he articulates himself the way he always did. It's just that he is not as connected to reality, so that's the hard part for me, because my inclination is to believe what he says and take him at face value, and sort of, and it's hard to no, he's not making sense, and that's okay, so.
Yeah, I think Lucy said something very beautiful that resonates with what you just said, that in the story that Jake wrote about Anne's life, anything had to make sense. It's like it was okay if it didn't make sense. And this is exactly the same thing that I am hearing from you. And I think that is also a part of the beauty of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that phrase collateral beauty, I mean, I wrote that, I like that. I mean, there is some collateral beauty. I mean, I hope, I'm searching for it. So,
Doesn't it have, a lot of times, doesn't it have something to do with, if the struggle is to try and have things be the way they were, which is impossible, and there's the only, there is only pain. But in order to sort of embracing the perpetual now of it all means you might go over ground that you've gone over a bunch of times, but inside that, there is a lot of collateral beauty.
No, I mean, in terms of his writing and creativity, that's absolutely true. That even though it's sort of telling the same story every day, there's a lot of variation in it, and there's a lot of great stuff in what he's talking about. I mean, as I say, the goal is always to sort of get him in the lane and let him go, and that's the good place.
Well, I mean it creatively, but I also mean it both relationally and emotionally, in that the fact that there is a good lane, the fact that there is a good place to go to in the face of this is such a blessing. And that it's something that not only encompasses him, but it also encompasses you too, because it is an act to be done, which necessarily is togetherness.
Yeah, no, I mean that it is, and that's sort of the saving grace is we can work together, and so that's what we do, and and the rest of the time, I mean, it's up and down. His moods are very labile, and so there's other stuff going on, but the creativity is what saves us.
And can you tell us a little bit about the memoir that you guys are writing about David's life?
Yes. The memoir started when he was more compos mentis, and in the beginning of it, he actually addresses losing his memory and trying to do this memoir while he's losing his memory. And, how it feels like, you're on a boat and you don't know who's steering or where you're going. And so that's sort of addressed in the beginning as he was less able to sort of remember stuff. We went back to our transcripts. I've sort of recorded, because David is always, when he's talking, he's always acting something out, or he's always telling a story, and there was just so much good material. I was just like, let's just record everything and transcribe it. And so in the course of writing his shows, he'd have students in the background. So he'd be talking about his life and stuff as he was writing. So we have returned to those transcripts to pull out the story of his life. So it's him, but it's pulled from tapes and stuff like that. And our eldest daughter is now putting that together. And then we give David a chapter, like we give him a chapter at a time that he then reads, and he can make notes and edits. So far, he's been very pleased with it. And, his edits, it's interesting. His edits are very syntactical, which is interesting because he has such a particular syntax. So, we're always grateful when he can move a comma and it changes something, but it's coming along well. I mean, I think it's beautiful. I think, Random House is, so we're going along, and I hope at the end we'll be able to interview him for sort of a wraparound where it's more, we're talking to him now about how he's feeling now, and I hope, we're hoping to be done in a couple of months, so I hope we'll be able to do that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Rita, and sharing all of these fascinating process about David, about you, how your stories came together. And I hope that you can stay with us for a few more minutes. We have a Q&A session. And I would like to invite Dr. Miller and Lucy to join the discussion.
I wanted to just tell you how much hope that you and David give to our community.
Yeah.
It is, I think it's easy to use the term, but it really is heroic. And, it would be so much easier to disappear, not be there. But, telling people who have degenerative diseases that there is hope, that there is potential, and that there is still a story to be told it's just an incredible story. And there are very few examples of it. I have to ask you one question. I can't imagine a more perfect movie than Deadwood. Do you think this would have been possible if David had not developed Alzheimer's disease?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, no, it would have been possible. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Would the story have been different?
No, because I don't think so, because even when he ended it the first time around, there were sort of similar themes at play.
Okay.
And this was just sort of a heightened return. This was really an epilogue, sort of, and a way to. So I don't think it would have been that different.
Okay.
There is a comment on the live chat, and Tony saying, I remember in an online lecture, David recounted a period earlier in his life when he wrote the same thing over and over again each day. As he described it, the repetition did not seem tedious or a hardship. He has described writing as a process of showing up. And he says, I'm so glad to know he's still showing up. And I think that is the hope that Dr. Miller was talking about.
Yes, he is still showing up and giving it everything he's got.
There are some questions for you, Jake. One of them says, did you write Unraveled because of a personal connection with FTD?
I think the story appealed because of what it was, but there are two personal reasons why the story appealed. One has to do with a family member that might be going through something similar. We don't really know yet, but the beginning phases of it and what does it mean, the fear of it, frankly, coming to terms with that has been a big theme. And also wanting to share with them that, that the idea that there is hope, that the idea that it's not immediately the end of everything, that there's, a whole world of life and love and stuff to be done. I felt that it was very important to say that out loud when it could be heard. And also the idea of creativity and not just neurodegeneration, but sort of differences in brains. I mean, you mentioned Bruce ADD. That's something I live with and definitely felt like in some kind of way that I have like a cheating insight into FTD, because ADD, you sort of have a moment of dementia, but then it comes back. It's like you get to sort of rent dementia for a moment. And the point being is that, I don't know, I guess I wonder how much I could naturally empathize with that, or frankly, explore the idea of where stuff comes from when it doesn't seem to come from a regular place.
Thank you for sharing. And Rita, we have a question for you. So it says that there are a lot of care partners of people living with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias listening in this audience. What advice would you give to them? What forms of support are you helped to get for yourself?
Well, early on, I did go to some support group things at the hospital over here, and to be, I mean, they were helpful in feeling you're not alone. They were kind of depressing because it was a lot of what this is just going to get worse, you know. So now I'm seeing a therapist who does sort of specialize in end of life stuff and dementia and all that stuff. So, and I depend on my friends and too much probably, and my children way too much. And, you know, that's just how we do it.
Well, that's some of the beauty that comes with this, is the family gathering around someone that they love and being able to give back, to learn more about their empathy circuits and learn, you know, about altruism, because we don't have very many opportunities to offer this to our parents and to our friends. So take every opportunity that you get, Rita.
I know. I mean, you know, you got to walk a fine line. You can't lay too much on them. They got their own children to deal with.
Yes.
Agreed. And I think this one's for Jake as well. Was there a part of the play that was especially hard to write, and why?
I don't know. What comes to mind when you ask that question are all the bits, frankly, the roadmap that was left by Bill, Steely, and Bruce about the paintings and how they related. There's a graph that talks about her that was in one of the papers about Anne, and it describes her sort of creative life and her cognitive decline. And then it has paintings on that graph, like a timeline. And in each painting, you can see a development. Like, you know, there was Unraveling Bolero, which is taking music and turning it into a visual art form. And then there's Pi, which is taking a mathematical concept and turning it into a visual art form. And then there's Migraine, which is taking pain and turning that into a visual art form. And then there's unbelievable photorealism, which is yet another development. And then there's leaning on symmetry, which is yet another kind of development. Now, those are artistic things, but those are also states of mind that have behavioral consequences. And so it was taking that track and having the behavior go over it and having both the artistic abilities and the degeneration sort of zipper up together. So there was a lot of structural stuff in thinking about it, which came from the research that you guys did. And the paper is amazing. It's extraordinary to look at. It's really a thing of beauty to see.
And there is, sorry, go ahead, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Lucy, what was the hardest part of her role? I think you captured so beautifully what someone with a progressive language disorder is like. And were there moments of self-doubt when you didn't think the piece was right, when you weren't, you know, doing what you were hoping? I wonder what it is like from the point of view of an actor.
It's very interesting because, of course, I had a great script. I had all this support in that I could ask questions, and I was able to do things like watch video of Anne when she was asked questions. So that was all tremendously helpful. And then there's a point, as with anybody, when you're playing a real person, when you've done your research and you've done all the things you need to find out, and then you just take this big leap into the dark where you think, I'm stitched together this version of this person and I just now have to do it. And that was even more poignant this time because we were in a pandemic. So we were all literally standing in these little boxes by ourselves trying to tell this story. The cast was never in the same room at the same time, although I knew the actors, which was a huge advantage. And so taking that step, and also unlike even the film work I've done, just no feedback, because I'm looking into the Zoom lens. I can't even look at my other actors, and I'm just trusting that we are telling this story and that that, you know, so I guess that big leap and saying, I have to trust my instinct, I have to trust, you know, my training that this will work. And then, of course, we didn't know until people watched it whether it did work. So, yes, but I think that in some ways that step into the dark is kind of bound into this character because she was constantly doing that, constantly taking forward those steps into the dark, like, you know, following that very, very strong instinct she had. And she had no idea why it was pushing her to do these things. She just had to take those steps. So maybe those two things got interwoven, and it ended up being kind of a beautiful mixture of those things.
Sure was.
So we're at a couple of minutes before we finish. So I'm just going to ask the last question to Dr. Miller that I have here on the chat, and maybe he can comment on that and give us some also closing remarks after he answers the question. So can you comment on the phenomenon of a patient speaking a foreign language more often and better than they did before diagnosis? And do you think Google's Calico ISRIB has potential as being a significant breakthrough drug?
Yeah, well, I don't, there's so many things that are happening in our field that I think are exciting. I think we have a new drug that's definitely not a cure, but may help some people by clearing the bad protein out of the brain. I think we underestimate the great talents of people with these illnesses. And, you know, many people live many years with mild disease. So I think rehabilitation, thinking about people's individual strengths is incredibly important. It won't ever be one size fit all. I mean, when you think of David Milch with this incredible sense of language and dialogue, I mean, you know, obviously this is a strength that you would work with someone who is a unique talent. Someone who's a musician, it would probably be music. So, but yes, technology too. I'm hopeful. I think this will, like polio 100 years ago, suddenly disappear. And I think we all want to be around when this happens.
Okay. And maybe just give some closing remarks for this event, Dr. Miller, if you're kind enough to do so.
Well, just huge thanks to Rita. Wow, are we ever grateful for your time with us. And please tell David how much we admire what he has done. Tell him he's really a hero and an unusual one. So that I want to say, very grateful, Stephanie, for leading this discussion. And of course, Lucy and Jake, who I've gotten to know very well. You put together a beautiful play that is advancing not only art, but our science. So thank you all.
Well, thank all of you for joining us, and special thanks to our panelists for a fascinating conversation about creativity, love, and dementia. Please tell a friend to watch the play, which will be available to stream for free at www.unraveled.com. Have a nice evening, everybody.